Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is my college football summer school series on Cover 3. I bring on the team experts from the 24/7 sports staff and ask them the questions I care about. No fluff. Which players will be toughest to replace? What position groups are sneakily better or worse than I realize? We get you the scoop on each team in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hey, guys, welcome back into Bud Elliott's College Football Summer School here on the Cover 3 podcast. I'm here with Hale McGrahanan. Did I check this up again this year?
No, you got it, dude. You nailed it first time.
Okay, perfect. All right. From the Big Spur, because last year I definitely jacked it up. I apologize. I've known this guy for a long time, and your last name trips me up at times, man. I apologies. 2022.
I've had it. I've had it for a long time. It gets me sometimes as well.
Here we go. All right, 2022, 8-5 for the Gamecocks. All the power ratings had them as like a legitimate top 30 level team, which is definitive on-field improvement, I think, for Shane Beamer. Kind of a wild finish, right? Like they lost at home to Missouri. They get blown out by Florida, and then out of nowhere, they're like, hey, we're just going to crush Tennessee by 1,000,000. And then they beat Clemson for the first time in a long while. I imagine folks in Columbia are feeling pretty good.
Yeah, and it probably felt like a million years to folks in Columbia since the last time they had beaten Clemson. But yeah, you mentioned that Florida loss, and as bad as they looked in that game, I don't think there were many people around town, save for maybe a handful of folks over in that football operations building who truly thought that they could beat Tennessee, much less be competitive or show signs of life. Then to follow that up with the Clemson win was pretty miraculous, just given the way things were going to that point in the season with the disappointing loss to Missouri when they just played awful and played even worse on the road in Gainesville. So putting those two wins back to back like that certainly set things up for quite a run in the offseason and has people around here really fired up. Probably as fired up as this fan base has been in almost a decade.
So last year, a lot of excitement with Spencer Rattler coming in, had a couple other nice transfer pieces coming in, and this wasn't a top 25 quality offense. I didn't think it was well designed, and they had Spencer Rattler lead the nation in passes that were behind the line of scrimmage, which I don't know, like maybe that suits him. I feel like he's got kind of a cannon. You'd like to see him push the ball down the field a little bit more with a really experienced offensive line that they had last year. Shane Beamer saw the same thing that I think we all saw and made a change. They go with Dowell Loggins. How is that hire received? I guess in juxtaposition to Clemson going and getting Garrett Riley.
Well, trying to compare the two, I think there's probably a little bit of uneasiness because there are plenty of people around here who wanted Garrett Riley to be the offensive coordinator last season. His name was kind of out there a little bit, and even before Beamer hired Marcus Satterfield in 2021, going back that far. But I think with Loggins and what we're sort of hearing, both on the record and behind the scenes, it sounds like this offense is going to be different in some ways. And while there will be some carryover and similarities, I think it's going to be a little more of like a college feel type of offense. With Satterfield's system, there was all the talk about trying to be pro style, and with that, there were some issues. Whether it was just trying to be too complex for the sake of being complex, for all the stuff that you mentioned about the screen passes. Maybe some of that was a result of trying to get things going in the run game or being an offshoot of the run game. And while they had some issues personnel wise last season, they certainly had quite a few when it came to just the scheme and the play calling and the overall feel of that offense. And it warranted a change. And here we are with Dowell Loggins heading into year 3 under Shane Beamer.
And obviously we don't know how it'll work out. Shane Beamer, I'm sure, talked to plenty of guys and picked the dude he thought would fit, the personnel that he has. In talking to the players, do they seem more comfortable with the new system?
They do. It's much more, I guess, simpler. It's simpler. The verbiage isn't quite as lengthy. I can't remember which game it was last year, but towards the end of the season during the broadcast, whoever was on the call was was given the play call, and it was very lengthy, a lot of words, and probably a lot for players to digest. So I think they've definitely shortened that up a little bit, and are probably trying to be more like the offense that we saw against Tennessee and Clemson, because they did simplify things. They did make things easier for the players. They did put them in better position to go out and make plays and execute. So I think we're going to see some offensive production that is more in line with what we saw in those two games, and less, Florida and Missouri games.
And I know in our comment sections, especially in our live shows, some South Carolina fans were not entirely sure that Satterfield was calling the offense in those last two games. That's good to hear that the players are confident in what Loggins will bring. Probably the most important guy for his confidence is Spencer Rattler, who you mentioned. Where's the area of his game that can improve the most, since he did come back to school and is going to look to elevate that draft stock?
I guess decision making, if that's an area that a guy that advanced and that's played that much, I don't know if you can really clean that up to this point in his career. But I think some of the decisions he made last year were not the best, and I think that could be reflected in the interception numbers, though. Some of those certainly weren't his fault. Balls bouncing off receivers' hands and things like that. But I think if he can just clean up those things a little bit, and maybe not press as much, I think there was probably a degree of that during the season when things weren't going so well. I think just sort of small things like that, and I'm sure he could probably get on here and talk to you about some of the mechanical things, or things that are probably a little bit beyond my scope of expertise, quote unquote. But I think really at the end of the day, it's just a matter of just making the right decision and knowing where the ball is supposed to be, and getting it there on time.
So South Carolina loses their top two rushers in Lloyd and Bell, who was basically a tight end that I think due to personnel they had to stick back there at times last year. The results were horrible with the run game last year. Obviously, again, they fired the OC, so like they're bringing in somebody new, which I think is a good move here. If their run game gets back on track, who is that guy that all the fans at home are going to need to know about?
That's an interesting question, Bud. Here we're recording this here on May the 10th, and South Carolina is trying to get Logan Diggs, Notre Dame transfer, out of the portal. So depending on when folks listen to this, that name could be relevant or just totally irrelevant. So he could be a guy if he ends up surprising folks and coming to South Carolina over LSU. He would be at the top of the list for sure. DeCarrion Joyner, who's played quarterback and receiver throughout his career, is moved over to running back, and really, in my opinion, that was sort of the natural fit for him if he was not going to play quarterback. I thought, even going back to his days as a high school recruit, that I thought he could fit at running back, and he's about 6'1", 220 pounds right now, and showed some signs during the spring game. So I think we could potentially see him being a factor regardless of what happens with the portal. Juju McDowell, who's a smaller scat back type of guy, is going to have a role. He's not going to be a between the tackles type of guy who can be a bell cow at 5'8", 5'9", 170 pounds on a good day. That's just not in his DNA, obviously. And again, just if this portal thing shakes out with Diggs, then absolutely he'll be at the top of the list. But we'll have to see how that goes.
We will certainly be watching that. So we had Cole Kublik on the show of the SEC Network, and he was pretty bold. He said, I think Antoine Wells is the best receiver in the SEC, and like I'm confident in that, which is obviously huge praise. The SEC has gotten a lot better at receiver in recent years. He was draft eligible, right? Like, did he kind of go into why he decided to come back, or what he's looking to improve most in his game?
I think he feels like there was a little bit of meat left on the bone. I mean, you go back to those last two games again, and even the bowl game. He feels like if he can put up that type of production over the course of a season, then I think he can really elevate his draft stock that way. I don't know if there are some specifics, like he wants to improve as a route runner, or some details like that. But when when it was clear that Spencer Rattler was coming back, I think Antoine Wells decided that he would join them. Those two were sort of in lockstep with each other throughout that process and figuring out whether or not they were going to be back. So if Spencer Rattler wasn't back, I don't think we'd be sitting here talking about Juice Wells and what he can add to this offense in 2023 and whether or not he's the best receiver in the league. I do know that he's probably as tough and physical after the catch as anybody else in the SEC, probably even the country. He's got an edge to him with the ball in his hands, and I think there are probably some areas again like maybe cleaning up some things before the ball gets to him that he's looking to improve on and get better at this fall.
So, but behind Juice Wells, South Carolina did lose a lot of its returning catches and yards. Who are the guys that the fans at home should know, like tight end or receiver 2, receiver 3? Did anybody emerge in spring camp as like guys that are definitely going to take those spots?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix between, well, not really a mix. It's a lot of guys who are transfers who've come in and really made an impression. At receiver specifically, there's Eddie Lewis who transferred in from Memphis, and
Oh, the Memphis kid.
Kind of he can kind of fill that role of Josh Vann. They're pretty similar in the way they profile as players. So I think you'll see him step in and be a factor within the offense. Sticking at receiver, Xavier Legette is back. He's had issues over the years with catching the ball, but when he's got the ball in his hands, he's pretty good, man. Like, he returned that kickoff against A&M and showed some flashes in the bowl game against Notre Dame when it was really just him and Antoine Wells out there catching passes. So he's pretty electric when he can hang on to the ball. Then at tight end, they brought in Trey Knox from Arkansas out of the portal, and a guy named Josh Simon who's from Sumter, South Carolina. Was a productive tight end at Western Kentucky for the last few years, and the staff's really excited about those two guys and what they're going to be able to add to this offense. They're obviously bigger body guys, and there hadn't been players kind of like that in a couple years. I mean, going back to Brian Edwards, and he was obviously a receiver, not a tight end. So they're pretty fired up about what that duo can bring to the offense and how they can allow that to complement Wells and Lewis and Legette, and even like a guy named Amarian Brown who has been with the team for a couple of years, transferred from Georgia Tech, who's really fast. So they've got a pretty good complement of receivers, and of course Nick Harbor coming in the summer, and I think we're gonna see this thing flying through the air a good bit, just given all the circumstances around the personnel and the offense.
I'm pretty excited to watch this thing. I don't know if there's an offense in the country that's going to benefit from a coaching change more than South Carolina, and hopefully that's not too depressing for Nebraska fans given who they hired. But I was like, this thing does not look well run for the most part of last year. If it doesn't take off, it's because the offensive line, which lost its top 3 guys by snap count, and then Jalen Nichols got hurt in the spring game, and it looked. I'm not a doctor. It looked bad. Do we know what a prognosis is on him at this point?
Nothing officially has been revealed as far as what the injury is, but Shane Beamer said, a week or two ago that he will not be available at the start of the season, and they're hopeful that he can be back before the end of it. So probably read between the lines on what that might be. But yeah, it's long term relative to this season, and yeah, the outlook as far as getting him back isn't too rosy. And that, going back to what I was saying with the circumstances of the offense and why they might have to just throw the ball a lot. They've lost a lot along the offensive line, like you said, Bud. Eric Douglas, who played a lot at center. I mean, he was a stalwart at center going back to the Muschamp days. He played a ton of football. Javon Gwynn, who played guard, was drafted by the Falcons. Dylan Wanham, who played a lot at right tackle, is also gone. So they're going to be breaking in some new guys and maybe having to rely on some guys at tackle who probably shouldn't be playing tackle, but that's just kind of where they're at right now, and trying to get some of these young talented offensive linemen up to speed maybe playing sooner than later. But yeah, I think it's going to be a little tense at times when folks are seeing the offensive line and what they're given to Spencer Rattler in terms of protection and things like that.
Do you think there's hope they can keep the drop off in offensive line play like to sort of like that mild to moderate range as opposed to just a massive problem?
I don't know that I'm gonna sit here in May and call it a massive problem, but I'm not trying to paint a nice picture by any means.
Gotcha.
They lost a ton of guys, and they're going to have some guys at some spots that probably again that playing tackle and they should probably be at guard, and some of them might be freshmen doing that. So it could be an issue, especially as it relates to the run game. So yeah, I think there's some South Carolina fans out there right now who are probably rolling their eyes as I say this because it's all sunshine and rainbows as far as they're concerned. But it's going to be something that we'll probably get a pretty good feel for when they go to Athens and play Georgia, and a couple weeks later when they have to go to Tennessee and play in Knoxville. So we'll see. I would imagine there will be a lot of quick hitting passing stuff for Spencer Rattler to play with this season.
Well, welcome to 140 catches, Juice Wells.
Yeah.
So switching over to the defensive side of the ball again, talking to Hale McGrahanan of the Big Spur, awesome South Carolina website, best in the business, and have done so for a long time. So the defense slipped last year from Brad White's top 20 unit by the kind of opponent-adjusted power ratings out there in 2021 to a top 60 defense last year. Obviously, didn't make a coordinator change since Brad White has shown good defensive coaching in the past. I do got to start with the front here. They lose 6 of their top 8 by snap count. So Zach Pickens, MJ Webb, Birch, Rod Green, Edmond, Brad Johnson. Can they avoid a big drop off here? Like on paper, it looks bad, but that's why we do summer school, right? Sometimes we find out it's actually not that bad.
Yeah, Clayton wants a defensive coordinator.
Why did I say Brad White? I'm sorry. Apologies.
Oh, that's cool. Well, I mean, as long as you're getting my name right, we'll get Clayton White next season.
There we go.
But something to kind of keep in mind, though, Bud, is that Arkansas game last year, they lost 2 of their best players on defense, and definitely in the front 7. Jordan Strawn, defensive end, and Mo Kaba, linebacker. They both tore their ACLs in that game. And Strawn, even though I think it was the second game of the season, Strawn was off to an awesome start. Like he led the country in sacks in 2020 at Georgia State, and looked like a guy who could be towards the top of the sack total list for the SEC last season before he went down. And Mo Kaba was their starting middle linebacker, a guy who was highly recruited out of high school and was going to be obviously counted on to play a lot last season. And when they lost those 2 guys, they lost some juice off the edge, and they lost a guy in the middle who was going to be running the show. So I think that certainly hurt them. And when you look at the season as a whole, I think it would probably been a little bit better had those 2 been up and playing. So we'll see where they are when the season gets going. Both have already torn an ACL in the past, so this is the second time through for those guys. So you can either say, well, they know what it takes to come back from it and are used to it, or the other side of that is, well, what are they going to be when they're playing? So, like you mentioned, lost Zach Pickens, who was a pretty good player in the middle, maybe didn't quite live up to some of the expectations that came with him being a 5-star recruit. Jordan Birch, as you mentioned, is transferred to Oregon, but again, it's May 10th, and as wild as this may sound, Bud, I don't know that he's going to stay at Oregon. There's been rumors out there that he could be looking to get back. We'll see how that shakes out. Gilbert Edmond transferred to Florida State. For all the good things you can say about the portal and what it's done for this team these first 2 years under Shane Beamer, losing your best 2 defensive ends from last season, it's going to be hard to replace. I don't care who you are. It's going to be tough to bounce back from that. And again, they've got some some irons in the fire from a portal standpoint. As we sit here again on May 10th, they're trying to sign Jatice Gier from
Oh, the
Syracuse,
Syracuse kid.
who's a pretty good player. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah, he is good.
yeah. So if they can get him into the fold, he visited earlier this month. He's originally from the state of South Carolina, so I think they feel pretty good about adding him to the mix and complementing Strong potentially. So there's still some moving pieces and things that aren't quite in place yet that might be in place by the time folks are listening to this
So
chat.
safe to say that there's a lot more confidence in the defensive line replacing the losses than the offensive line replacing what they lost.
I wouldn't say I'm a lot more confident because I mean I think losing Birch and Edmond is a lot, and I don't know. It's tough for me to sit here and say that. I think Birch really started to come on late last season. Edmond played pretty well. His role elevated when Strong went down. So at a position like defensive end where there's not a lot of them in the portal, and when there are half decent ones, a lot of people want them. It's hard to replace those guys. So and I guess you could say the same thing about offensive tackle too, obviously. But they do have some young guys that they're going to be trying to count on, like Desmond Umeozulu, who enrolled early, who's a 4-star recruit out of the DC area. They've got a couple of defensive tackles, and Tonka Hemingway, who's played on the edge, and Elijah Davis, who was a JUCO signee and was in this spring and played some end too. So they can kind of make it work. Probably better compared to like trying to stick guys who are more suited at guard to offensive tackle. Like I think they're probably a little bit better if they have to slide some defensive tackles out to defensive end. So maybe I'd feel a little more confident in answering your question on the defensive line that way.
Makes sense. Just a couple more here. Let's go. Secondary returns their top 3 by snap count, all who graded pretty well. They do lose Cam Smith. They lose Darius Rush. How big of a loss are those guys?
Well, I mean, Cam Smith was a 2nd-round pick by the Dolphins, and Rush was a 4th-round pick by the Colts. They're really good, and they played a ton, obviously. And there's not a ton of depth on this team at cornerback. Marcellus Dial played a lot last season and the year before that, for that matter. And O'Donnell Fortune has been around a little bit and played some, but he's not, real experienced in terms of playing time. And behind them, there's again some question marks. I think Dial and Fortune are pretty good. I don't think they're Smith and Rush the last year or going back the year before that, but things can change. I mean, I think back to last year's conversation, Bud, that we had, and I was talking about RJ Roderick and Devontae Reed at safety and how there wasn't a lot behind them. And, halfway into the season, it's Nicky Manwaring and DQ Smith, 2 lightly recruited freshmen who are really good and are going to be, big time players for this defense for the next couple of years. So going back to the cornerback thing, though, I think there are some concerns there from a depth standpoint, but I think those first 2 guys are pretty good. They're just going to have to try to get some other guys ready and hope for the best there.
I'll tell you, man, South Carolina and Arkansas, just going through my notes from last year, had a ton of annoying defensive injuries, and just like they had to play a lot of young guys. So maybe that experience will pay off, for both those teams this fall. I do want to ask you, and we don't talk a lot of special teams on here, because special teams year to year can be seemingly almost random. Like most teams are not great at special teams every year. South Carolina, they seem to be doing something. Like they kind of jump off the page stats wise that they're consistently like good to really good in special teams. Do they do more? Like how do they do more in practice than other teams do here? Is it just the quality of like kicker punter they have? Because they're really damn good all the time.
I would say the answer to all those things is yes. They have Pete Limbo as their special teams coordinator, and that's all he does. He doesn't coach another position. He just runs the show on special teams. And obviously Shane Beamer, the whole Beamer ball thing was something that he certainly wanted to try to bring to South Carolina. and he said before that if he was going to have a special teams coordinator, not named Shane Beamer, it was going to be Pete Limbo, and Limbo's done a really good job. He got a big time raise this offseason and is going to be around here probably for a while. And you look at some of the results of what they've done on the field. Kai Kroger, the punter, Mitch Jeter, the kicker, the place kicker, have both been really good. Like those guys have, to answer your question about are they just good? Like, yeah, they're legit. Kroger is also a pretty good passer of the football too, and we've seen some of the success they've had in running fake punts and even fake field goals, and what that's done for this team, and not just in a game, but from an overall identity standpoint, it's helped give this team something to kind of hang its hat on when the offense isn't going so hot or the defense is struggling to get off the field. That the special teams has been something that they can count on, and it's referred to as a third of the game, and maybe some folks roll their eyes at that notion, but they've definitely made it a strong third of the game at South Carolina, and Pete Limbo and Shane Beamer's commitment to him and having him around on the staff and doing a lot in practice when it comes to special teams has paid off clearly.
I mean, I don't know if it's smart to just have a special teams coach, but if the guy can coach special teams and is really good, then obviously it makes a whole lot of sense to have it. Like not everybody should have one unless you have a guy that really coaches special teams well. That's a cool kind of inefficiency that Beamer seems to have found there. Obviously, his dad was, as you mentioned, pretty darn good at it as well. I'm excited about what South Carolina's building. I mean, like the way they're recruiting, and it just like the way kids talk about it. I mean, I know you talk to these guys too. It feels like, if they can just keep it rolling a little bit this year, like the young talent on this team that they're bringing in that they just signed I think it's pretty encouraging, man. Like he's doing a lot better. I bet their win total last 2 years over, but like he's exceeding my expectations at almost every turn. So this got to be fun to cover these guys.
It is. It's refreshing compared to the way things were the last few years under the previous regime. And that's not really a shot at them. That's just kind of how it is around here now. It's exciting. The fan base was pretty vocal in wanting to get Shane Beamer back here as a head coach. The people who make the decisions, the voices that matter wanted Shane Beamer back as the head coach. And, I was a little hesitant to sit there and say like, oh, this is going to work out great because, he'd never been a head coach before and you just never really know. But so far so good. And it really helped that they won those 2 games at the end of the last seasons, because I don't think the feel good stuff we're sitting here talking about right now would feel as great. But yeah, things are going well from a recruiting standpoint. They're doing a really good job, in my opinion, recruiting both lines of scrimmage.
Yes.
Now we mentioned the offensive line and some of those issues that they could have this season. There's a reason they went really hard and have prioritized it for the 2023 class and the 2024 class as well. So if folks can just kind of hold on and kind of grin and bear it a little bit that way, I think it's going to pay dividends down the road up front on offense.
Absolutely. Hale, really appreciate the time here on Cover 3 Summer School. And guys, make sure you check out The Big Spur. Awesome site.